Welcome back to yet another G37 video with terrible voiceovers. And as the title states, I'll be preparing my G37 for its first track day. For these preparations, I'll be upgrading the biggest weak points on the car, such as the brakes and cooling. Specifically, I'll be upgrading to the Akebono calipers on the front end while leaving the original calipers on the back. Alongside the calipers, I'll be installing some braided brake lines with some EBC Blue Stuff pads and Motul RBF 600 brake fluid to keep up with the higher brake temps on track. As a side note for all my fellow base model G owners, the base model 370Z rear brake pads do fit on our cars, so I'll leave the links to the parts I bought for this video in the description. Now, the reason I'm currently only upgrading to the big brakes on the front axle is because the front brakes will be dealing with the most stress on track. And the Akebono calipers also have more track-oriented pads available on the market. And for the rears, I'll just be swapping in the pads, lines, and doing some new rotors. Now it's time to get to work. Obviously, before I install any parts, I'll need to remove any of the old and unwanted parts. Now, I'm not going to make a step-by-step tutorial on this video because there's plenty of people out there that have already made videos on the G37 and 370Z platform that could probably do a 10 or 100 times better job at it than I can. So instead, I'll link the two videos that I personally used for this install down below. Thankfully, despite the car being originally from New York or New Jersey, if I remember correctly, none of the bolts were rusted on too badly, which made things nice since I didn't have to deal with any rusted bolts. Now, one of the big differences between the original 2-piston calipers and the Akebono calipers is the rotor dimensions. Since the Akebono rotor is larger, I had to cut the dust shield to make clearance for the new rotor. For some reason, I ended up needing to cut a lot more of the original dust shield, which I'm not sure if it's a difference between the all-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive platforms, but most videos I saw just cut the outer edge of the dust shield. And this is genuinely the last clip that I ended up filming of the install of the new brakes. Originally, I was going to use a vacuum bleeder to bleed the brakes, but unfortunately, the kit that I bought that said that it had an adapter to fit a Nissan BrakeMaster reservoir didn't end up fitting. So I ended up having to manually bleed them in the end. And here's just a short clip of a couple hundred or maybe 1,000 miles after I installed them, and things went pretty well, honestly. Now, it's time to move on to the cooling mods that I stated earlier in the video. And for that, I ended up getting a 30-row transmission cooler and 30-row oil cooler. Once again, just like the brakes, I didn't end up recording anything of me installing the oil cooler and transmission cooler. But I'll go ahead and just show how I routed my lines to said coolers. For the oil cooler lines, I ended up routing them under or right beside the oil pan, since this was the only area that I could go through to make sure that the oil lines wouldn't get pinched. After that, I had the oil lines go over the lower coolant hose and go over the last part of the front subframe. I also routed the transmission lines over the same area as the oil cooling lines, but I didn't end up using AN lines for them. Now, to get all the lines up to the front of the car, I ended up cutting a decent amount of the shielding or plastic that's right by the radiator, and then routed them up to their respective areas. And I also went ahead and got an aluminum under tray or undershroud, since this should be able to protect the oil lines a little bit better than the original plastic under tray. And the last thing that I did was put on a positive battery terminal cover, since some tracks require it. And after the first 300 miles, everything was perfect. Until the transmission lines blew. I'm not sure how, and I'm not sure why, but they ended up just blowing randomly one day when I was out driving. And to top it off, it looked like it was just an external blow, which made no sense since it obviously had to come from the inside of the line. Nonetheless, though, I got it fixed and was able to get to my first track day. For my first ever track day, I ended up booking an open lapping session at Pueblo Motorsports Park. While yes, it probably would have been better for me to go to an HPDE session, the first HPDE session in my local area was several months out, and I didn't want to wait that long. And the open lapping on top of that is a lot cheaper for doing either a half day or even a full day at Pueblo Motorsports Park compared to the $500, $600 that you spend during an HPDE session. And also, the two major tracks here in Colorado end up having open lapping days nearly twice a week during the summer and also go into the winter. So I could get a lot more seat time for a lot less, which, guaranteed, it's going to take me a little bit longer to probably get better, but getting the more seat time should help. Now, for my first session, I'm obviously not going to go fast because I don't know what the hell I'm doing out there. But on top of that, it also rained heavily the night before and also rained when I was driving down to the track. So, the track was a little wet in some areas, which doesn't terribly go well with 200 treadwear tires. Now, before the track day, I ended up adding some heat tape onto the intake tubes themselves to hopefully try and give the car a little bit more of a power boost, but also help keep the intake temps down. And the last thing that I did before the track day was buy a set of Gladiator X Comp HP tires in the 245/40/18 size and put them on my stock 18x8 wheels, since obviously my Potenza Sports on my 19-inch wheels would not handle the heat. Now to give a full rundown on my first track day. To put it simply, it went great. For starters, the car had zero issues even when doing all 4 30-minute sessions that day, which I was very surprised by. Now, the car did end up having a few small issues during the day, but I wouldn't call them bad, since they're easy to fix. Now, the first tiny issue with the car was that it was having a shift spike issue when upshifting, and come to find out later, the transmission fluid was a little low. But on the bright side, I wasn't able to find any leaks around the transmission or transfer case. And the last issue was that I got the brakes pretty hot this day. Both the front and rear rotors ended up having a bit of a bluish purple color to them after I ended up finishing my 4th session. Thankfully, the front rotors went back to normal while I was driving back home. But the rear rotors were worse off since they were still glazed even after a few hundred miles of driving after the track day. So before my next track day, I'll make sure that I get this issue fixed, and I do believe that I'll just need to cut the rear rotor dust shields. Unfortunately, while chasing the Porsche in front of me, I ended up pushing my braking zone a little too far going into turn 9. Instead of braking at the 3 like I normally do, I believe I ended up braking around the 2 or a little past the 2 marker. And since I ended up carrying too much speed into the corner, I ended up understeering and going 2 wheels off track. Fortunately, didn't cause any damage though, which is probably the best thing that could come from it. Now to finish off this video, I'm going to go ahead and show you a comparison between the fastest lap in my first session and the fastest lap in my 4th session, which ended up being my fastest lap of the day.